Thank you. We'll call to order 901 Services Enterprise Board meeting at 2:37 on Monday, April 21st. Thank you all for making it. Appreciate it. Couple quick items to come up before the main brunt of our agenda. First up is discussion and approval of the draft minutes of our April 9th meeting. Everybody had a chance to look through them. Any comments, concerns about our draft minutes from last time? Being none, would anybody like to propose a motion?
I move we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Amy. Last chance for discussion. Any further comments? All right. And those in favor of approving April 9th minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. They are approved. Thank you. Public comments. Public comments are limited to up to 15 minutes total, and each member of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes on any topic relevant to the purposes of the enterprise. If any member of the public would like to speak, please indicate so now by raising your hand in Zoom to be called upon. After we address any raised hands in Zoom, we will then call for any additional comments from members of the public who may be dialed in on a phone line and are unable to raise their hands. Are there any members of the public wishing to make a comment before the Services Enterprise? Seeing none, is there anybody on this call who was unable to raise their hand? You may unmute and state your name now. Very good. Public comment is closed. All right, on to the brunt of what we wanted to discuss today, our project setting, and discussing where we want to go, largely, at least at a high level, but kind of zoning in on where do we want to put our emphasis, where do we want to put our initial efforts in heading toward a budget and therefore a services enterprise fee based on these project settings. Anybody like to get us started? I guess I can start us as far as kind of initially looking through the act that created this board, the act that starts us on kind of our what we should be looking toward. Some of the items that we could be looking at are various training initiatives around 911. Specifically, do we want to look at things like Colorado Training Standards Institute, the CTSI, and how we might interact with them, the Colorado 911 Resource Board. Do we want to start our own educational materials? We can work with the 988 board. Do we want to look at maybe some outside vendors who focus on training that are some of our centers may have looked at as far as training materials, training systems. We can look at cybersecurity needs around 911. We can look at, I know somebody, Matt, I believe, brought up the statewide GIS initiatives that are currently going on for NextGen 911. Do we want to look at emergency notification services, whether that's grant program for agencies to make proposals before us? Or do we look at contacting vendors for statewide contract potential? Amy, yes.
Yes, sorry, I had someone pop into my office really quick. So, I know last time we kind of asked, or somebody, I believe Matt maybe asked for us to have our top five, kind of not necessarily in order, but kind of. So my top couple of ideas were cybersecurity and the GIS project. I think we also had the resource center possibly thrown in there. So that was one of my top five. Sorry, you can hear me better this way. And then statewide training and pub ed. Those were some of my top five. Those were on my top five.
Training and what? What was the last one?
Public education.
And I went through and tried similar, did kind of a similar, just went back to the legislation and listed out the kinds of things that it said we could cover with this. And a few of the categories are maybe go a little broad. But generally, I would agree with Amy's top ones in terms of GIS and cybersecurity. And statewide training. I like the category of matching funds in a sense that with federal grants, to the extent it can really broaden the reach of what you can do. But other than like just specific topic areas, it also seemed like to me we really should focus on really as a first matter things that are really statewide initiatives that aren't going to be otherwise covered through another fee or fund, whether that be the individual governing authorities surcharges or 988 or any of the rest of them where there's kind of some overlap and can potentially be funded. It seems like if we could focus on getting the most efficient and biggest impacts statewide on some of these areas, whether it's training, cybersecurity, GIS, those definitely seem like they fit into that category, and that's where we would tend to lean. Again, with a way of trying to look to make sure we can get the biggest bang for the buck, keep the fee as low as we can and get the most out of it where we can.
Andrew or Matt?
Well, so I know we talked about the resource center. I like that idea insofar as back when the director position of the resource center was a full-time position, the resource center was able to support all the PSAPs around the state to a greater degree, particularly around some of these initiatives that are kind of have come up again. I know, there was some discussion about this in last week's CCOA meeting about how, talking about where other groups within the state could kind of pick up the slack that has been left since the resource center director position had to go to part-time. So that's something that I would be certainly interested in discussing is, with that said, the resource center has been working on other funding opportunities. And so I would want to have a very careful discussion about, are we then going to wind up, if there are other funding opportunities available, I don't necessarily want to volunteer more of the state 911 fee for that in perpetuity. So, it's something I'm interested in discussing. The other random idea that I had, and there's nothing specifically about it, I don't think, in the bill, but since costs for the EZNet are designed to be offset by the state 911 fee, and since our budget also comes from the state 911 fee, could we look at some of the non-recurring costs for big EZNet projects that will finally get us to that kind of next gen i3 kind of standpoint, particularly with, and I'm a little bit behind here, but the FCC's report and order around some of the requirements now that I think went into effect this month or going into effect next month, or I think it's November of this year. I can't remember. I had a Nina webinar going on in the background while I was doing some other work this morning, but where we're finally in a position where we can require originating service providers to provide information in SIP format and all of those things, but making sure that the state's EZNet is where it needs to be to make that happen. So that was one of the other thoughts that I had, but happy to.
Andrew,
Yeah.
can I ask you a question about that? So when you say non-recurring costs, you're talking about things like installation fees and things like that, or are you talking about like optional services they were I'm trying to understand what falls into that category.
No, that's a very good point. I am thinking, and maybe this is where a discussion with and so I'm thinking out loud here. So folks, feel free to jump in and tell me where I'm missing the mark here. But Lumen, when they develop the pricing, yes, there are non-recurring costs, but then there's also a lot of costs that's kind of baked in to the cost of the EZNet. And so could we as an enterprise take on basically some of the capital expenditure for perhaps some larger work that has to happen to get us there? So I mean, that's kind of as far as I've thought it through, Lynn, but you are correct. I am not thinking paying for the installation fees at individual PSAPs, because some PSAPs might need it and some might not. I'm thinking more kind of the infrastructure costs, such as they are, to get Colorado's EZNet actually up to par.
Okay, thank you.
But that's not a bad idea. I like that. And just as kind of a little more background there, just looking at some of the pending rulings, pending potential changes to the tariff, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on how these rulemakings go, $2,000 to $3,000 per SIP line, per 911 line, essentially, per agency. When we're looking at, I know this number kind of goes up and down. When we're looking at 620 SIP lines across the state, we're looking at around 1.8 million based on the last numbers I've seen. Matt.
It's my understanding that the surcharge itself is supposed to cover that new improvement fee per the improvement plans.
That has been included?
That's, I mean, maybe somebody from the PUC can clarify. But that was my expectation.
Daryl?
Yes, so the surcharge this year was raised from 9 cents to 12 cents. That extra 3 cents was calculated to pay for that additional basic emergency service improvement plan charge. And as far as paying for non-recurring costs, I would say that those potentially could also be paid through the surcharge. But if there's anything that the commission opts not to pay through the surcharge, then that is something that the enterprise board could potentially pay for.
Thank you, Daryl. Yes, Matt.
If I remember correctly, so far, the only NRC that was not covered by the surcharge was the original NRC for migrating to the EZNet, which was facilitated through a grant, actually, in part by the PUC and in part by the federal government.
I appreciate that history. Certainly you and Daryl have a much deeper knowledge of the historical interactions. My understanding was the tariffs that and rules that have been taken into effect and approved. There weren't any NRCs coming, but there were potential NRCs in other drafts and other requests from CenturyLink. So those have not been set yet, is my understanding.
So if I may, yes, CenturyLink did include some pretty hefty non-recurring charges, if I may say so. In the last tariff filing that they made, that tariff filing was withdrawn. They are
Okay.
likely to refile it. And as I said, the commission could include those non-recurring charges because it's easy, because they will be charged by concurrent session, and that's how the surcharge is distributed. It would be easy to reimburse those through the surcharge. But I can't speak as to what the commission will actually do, whether they would actually include those or not. And if they don't, that could be something that this enterprise picks up the gap on.
And those are NRCs for services added to run on top of the EZNet.
Well, they had a number of different things. One was text to 911, one was GIS, GIS portal, and that one had the largest NRC because it also included development of GIS data. I think after these rules come out on what counts as a basic emergency service optional tariff item, I think what CenturyLink files when that's done or close to being done will probably look different, and they may not include as many things in that NRC as they originally wanted to.
And unfortunately, we play kind of a timing game with when and if they resubmit.
That is correct.
I guess my where I was headed with that is they are service oriented as opposed to the improvement plans for the physical infrastructure.
Curious from a historical perspective, things like NRCs, I would be curious of the past PUC's rulings and fee settings, because these are one time, would hypothetically or in the past, have they increased the surcharge to pay for them and then decrease them the next year because they were non-recurring one-time costs?
So the state 911 surcharge hasn't been around that long. It was basically put in place because of the EZNet non-recurring charges. First of all, we paid for those non-recurring charges for the EZNet installation through federal grants and through CPAP funds, which have now been exhausted. So the local agencies did not have to pay any of those non-recurring charges. But if there were another big project that had large non-recurring charges, we no longer have those funds available to pay those. The one example that we do have is when they implemented ECATS. We did increase the surcharge basically for that first year of ECATS, or we included that in the calculations for the surcharge to pay for those non-recurring charges for the implementation. So there is that precedent of using the surcharge to pay for non-recurring charges, even though it was a relatively small amount compared to what they've been talking about for the next step of Next Gen 911 implementation.
And Daryl, was that when the initial proposal from the PUC was to reduce the charge by, I think, 1 cent based on a variety of numbers, revenues,
Yep.
and several of the authorities filed comments to the effect of, no, please leave it the same instead of reducing it for that NRC.
Yes, so when we originally calculated it, we were at 9 cents and it looked like we could go down to 8 cents and cover all of the recurring charges. And once we included the non-recurring charges, that brought it back up to 9 cents, and that's where we ended up. So I'll just say, I think, this enterprise can consider whatever it wants to fund that's allowable under Section 104 in the statute. But because we already have a mechanism to pay for things that are in the tariff, it might be beneficial to focus on things that can't be in the tariff, like grants for training, for money for the resource center, all of the other things that you kind of already have talked about.
So just kind of going through some of the things that have been talked about, I really do agree and appreciate the emphasis on a statewide focused. What is going to give us the most bang for our buck, the most coverage, so to speak. Toward your comment, Daryl, how does, for instance, GIS, how would that play into a decision from the PUC on surcharges versus from our board?
So that's a tricky question to answer right now, because it kind of gets into what's going to happen with this rulemaking. But I think the answer is, it depends on what kind of GIS you're talking about. If you're talking about a portal that will be used to upload GIS data into a geospatial routing database, that could be considered part of the tariff, whereas the initial development of the GIS data probably would not be. And that's just based on the draft rules that are going to be issued next week. If the final version of the rules ends up being something different, then the answer might be different.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And certainly we don't have.
Oh,
Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
the RFP that the state is now going through in partnership with the Resource Center on the GIS project, how much work is going to be left over after those funds have been spent and that project done that we could potentially take on?
So the way it was funded, or the way that the funding was described when the commission approved that funding for the Resource Center, it was going to create a statewide GIS data set for PSAP boundaries, but it does not include any money, obviously, for maintenance. It's a one-time funding mechanism. So there may be a need for ongoing maintenance of that database. Additionally, any money left over from the development of the PSAP boundary database could also be used to provide support for local agencies that need to develop their own local GIS data sets. We don't know how far that money will go and how many of those local needs will be covered by that. So there may be additional needs there as well.
And when we talk about a statewide portal for uploading data, do you envision something that OIT creates, or an off-the-shelf product that we go out and buy?
I was talking more about what CenturyLink was offering through their last tariff offering that they withdrew. The TDMS it serves a couple of different purposes, but one of its purposes would be to upload GIS data from the local agencies that CenturyLink would then use for geospatial routing.
So that portal would be an inherent aspect of CenturyTrado's offering of i3 core services for uploading GIS data. So that spatial interface in the NG 911 i3 model, right, would be that portal. And I see it as inherently being provided by Intrado for them to intake the GIS data that each local 911 authority is responsible for causing to be provided. So they can do some initial basic level QA/QC to make sure it'll function in the core services. and then establish that data in their next gen GIS for location validation, emergency call routing, et cetera. So conversely, the need would then be GIS data preparation and maintenance at the local level that each authority is responsible for.
And that is definitely something where there will be 911 authorities that just don't have the expertise, the bandwidth to provide that.
Absolutely. Yep. That'll be one of our biggest roadblocks to accomplishing statewide I3.
Curious, people's feelings as far as, it seems like we have a fairly strong desire with GIS as one of our potential focuses. I'm curious people's thoughts as far as this board, what is our role in that? And for any of these projects, are we looking to accept requests and kind of provide a grant structure for authorities, PSAPs, agencies? Are we looking to create a contract avenue with preferred vendors? What are your thoughts as far as which direction we're going, regardless of the focus? Or could that be different depending on the focus? One obviously puts a little more onus on us to work with vendors and work through a contract process to then offer to authorities versus more of the onus on the authorities. But in a project like a GIS project where the more uniformity they have, the better, where is the balance that you guys see as far as statewide effort versus intentional effort, if you will?
Well, I think if we make it, well, so it specifically, the bill specifically calls out, does it specifically call out matching grants or just grants in
That is an
general?
option that we have
An
available.
option. Okay. So the benefit of matching grants is that it keeps some of the responsibility and the onus on the individual authority. However, I could also see there being a situation where a small authority, doesn't even have the bandwidth for that much. So that's where some of the statewide conversation, I think, can elucidate what exactly the lift is for some of this. So if we decide, my office lights are turning off on me. If we decide that GIS is kind of the first place we want to go, then we could, kind of make our first effort. All right, let's figure out what work is going to need to be done, what work is going to be covered by the resource center RFP, and where can we reasonably identify places for us to kind of start filling in gaps, recognizing that then next year it might look different. Lynn, you're muted if you're.
I'm sorry. So I guess my question comes because it sounds like what you're explaining, and I understand if they take in a certain amount of the investment on their side, but then that money's got to come from somewhere too. That turns around and ends up in either them raising their fees or whatever. It all becomes a math game. Just from that standpoint, but just not being as familiar with the topic or away from it for a long time. Is there something that is necessarily about what you do and how you do it in this space that's unique to each location authority, whatever, or is what they're trying to accomplish generally all the same, such that then it really becomes more a matter of how can we most cost effectively and time-wise efficiently get it implemented?
And I think, certainly I'm not the authority on this. I would say my understanding is the end goal is fairly uniform. The end goal is to have a uniform set of data. But to Matt and Andrew's points, there are some agencies who have the internal staff, have the capacity, have the ability to do a lot of that themselves versus others who don't. And so it's the path taken that could vary greatly.
Okay.
Is that a fair representation?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, all I could do is speak hypothetically and out of ignorance, but I could see, because there's several different elements, particularly when it comes to GIS data. There's the actual work to verify the addresses, and then there's the work to you get it into a GIS database of some sort. And then there's validation of the data, and there's all these, and at least in Denver, that's managed by several different teams. Granted, it's a big city with a lot of addresses, so it probably needs to be managed by a bunch of different teams. But I don't know if that is, uniformly managed across the state.
Yes, Matt.
To the question of essentially, do we give funding to provide for these things being taken care of? Or what I think I heard was we implement a program through the enterprise to provide, in other words, to contract directly through for the enterprise to contract directly with a vendor, for example. I think if we look at the statute carefully, all of the clauses are about providing funding, not doing it ourselves necessarily, except for a few of them which don't specify funding for, right? And it may be that the intent was also funding for, it's just not how it got written. But if we look at, is it section 108, subsection 5, there's all of these items, funding for this, funding for that, and then cybersecurity support for services and software, GIS programs for the benefit of governing bodies and PSAPs. Again, it doesn't specify funding in those two cases, grant programs. And then there's a kind of a catch-all down below, any other items of benefit for governing bodies and PSAPs, any other expenses necessary for the administration of the enterprise and the execution of its activities. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room, but I think most of the language is about providing funding. Now, I think it would be also fair to say that the enterprise could have its own project manager or that sort of position to ensure fair and reasonable use of the funds being provided.
I'm not looking at the end law. I'm just looking at the act right now. We also have the capability to enter into contracts necessary for professional and technical assistance or advice, and to supply other services related to the conduct affairs of the enterprise. So I guess in that, at least my thought was the possibility, whether or not we choose to enter into contracts for those services versus, are we funding the project or are we funding the agencies, I guess is where my question is going. Where do we want our emphasis to be? And that can change based on the type of funding, the type of project we're talking about. But I just want to kind of throw that out there as we're looking at these, which direction are we thinking?
Could potentially be both on an individual case basis. If a 911 authority and or PSAP indicates, hey, we want to develop this capacity ourselves. Can you help us get started? As opposed to someone else that needs a much stronger helping hand on getting started.
Has
Okay.
anybody, does anybody have experience in that realm of contracting? I mean, from a board perspective? Contracting with vendors and things like that, because I have not, obviously, at work I do, but from a board perspective, I just. And then, does it normally that, the agency conducts the work and then asks for a reimbursement, or do they ask for funds up front and then provide, we provide the approval for that, and then they provide receipts and those kinds of things? I have not, being that I haven't worked for a board before, that's why I'm kind of listening to what you guys have to say, just for some direction.
I have a little experience more on the end user side, more on the agency side.
Right.
The board or whatever that kind of contracting authority creates the contracts, creates the framework. The contractor, the vendor, then goes into contract with the agency, but in this case, it would be us, the 911 services enterprise pays the vendor for work provided to the end agency.
I think typically the ones I've been involved in, and yeah, Daryl can keep us straight on this, but they've typically gone through RFP processes, honestly, to select a vendor and to manage it and put it in place. I don't know legally, as far as the board, if there's anything that way we'd be obligated to do that. Yes, we'd have to look into that, or what might be the best risk-free way to do that. But certainly I have a lot of experience over lots of years establishing contracts with vendors and things like that, and managing them. It kind of all starts with what upfront process to use.
And it would put a lot more work on us.
Right. You mean
Yes, Darryl.
contracting with the vendor would? Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So that's why I was like, ooh, how much, do we want to force agencies into using a specific vendor versus maybe using their preferred vendor that they would like to use? So I know Daryl has something.
Yeah, so and Lynn, I'm glad you spoke up, because I think, looking at the 988 enterprise might be your best example. They do have contracts with vendors, including the crisis hotline provider. That contract is usually done through an RFP process through the department that houses the enterprise. So in your case, it'd be DORA. You'd be using DORA's contracting process. And that's one of the reasons why this enterprise needs to get an MOU in place between it and DORA, so that DORA can do that for you and be reimbursed from the enterprise fund itself. But then it would probably be incumbent on the enterprise to then manage that contract when it's in place, to make sure that the contractor is doing what they're supposed to be doing, reviewing reports from the contractor if those are required, et cetera. So if you do go down that road with contracting, it might be in the enterprise's best interest to eventually hire a project manager. But as far as the question of whether you can do grants versus contracts, I think, the way I'm reading the statute and the way it was envisioned as we wrote it was that it gives you the flexibility to do either. And you could, as you suggested, Michael, it might depend on what the project is, whether a grant is more appropriate versus a contract.
Thank you. So as we approach our time here, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to make sure I am kind of encapsulating what we have so far. A focus on statewide level initiatives, things that are not covered under other funding methods. Some of those potentially being GIS projects, cybersecurity, and statewide training initiatives. Potentially including assistance to the Colorado 911 Resource Center. And Andrew, I do really like your NRC, but I think until there is one, kind of hard to plan for that.
You bet.
Can I add just one more generic thought? I'm guessing this is somewhat understood anyways, but probably worth keeping in the back of our minds. For me too, it's also really important that whatever we look at and how we look at it, that it isn't running the risk of using 911 fees for things that might preclude us from getting federal funds. So that we're like, oh, you didn't divert your funds inappropriately, and then we're cut off from federal funds. So I think that just always needs to be in the background.
Yep.
Agreed. Amy also mentioned, Amy, I think you mentioned public education. Did you list that one, Michael? I'm sorry.
So I kind of include that in, and maybe I shouldn't, in statewide training, whether that's training for comm centers, authorities, PSAPs, or the public. Do we want to separate that out more distinctively? Because they are different, different targets. So certainly it could be separate projects.
They could both be under one budget line item if that's what everyone wanted. I just agree with Amy that should be a thing. That's just a matter of is the person or the group making that choice? Do you tend towards splitting, or how do you classify things? Do you tend towards separating them or not? I don't know that it really matters.
I kind of view them as two separate things. Statewide training being that, I would assume, being agency training, dispatcher training, telecommunicator training, those kinds of things. Public education being separate, educating the public on what we do and those kinds of things, what's coming down the pipe, I look at them as two separate things.
So an internal versus an external focus.
Correct. Yeah. It can still be like a statewide, I guess, public education campaign type thing.
Or funding for local public education programs,
Yeah.
whether it's 911 or emergency notification that's related to 911.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I think big picture, something that's been also discussed in other forums is the enterprise should probably be thinking about how large of a pool that the enterprise is holding, of a pool of funds at any one given time. There's clearly already been a lot of perception that there's money there already to be taken for other purposes other than which the enterprise fee was created. And there's probably some validity in what some other folks are suggesting about if there's a pool of funding there, then it could be seen as being rated Tabor or not, federal grants or not.
And I guess on that point too, I don't know where and how we fit into the statutory structure or not, but this is a cash fund that's being created. Is that correct, Daryl?
Yes, it is.
there is a statutory limit of how much you can have in a balance over, at the end of kind of like a fiscal year end point in time and things like that, so that you don't carry excess cash. Not that that totally controls the fundraising piece of it if they really want to. But I think a lot of it's in place to help manage, not just storing up reserves as well as that kind of thing. So I would be curious if we're subject to that same limitation.
The amount in the statute for the enterprise says revenue of less than $100 million in its first 5 years. Is that what you're referring to, Lynn? No, that's
Yes,
actually
yes, I
revenue,
know
not
there was that-
carryover. Sorry.
Over 5 years, yeah, and maybe that trumps it. There was like a year-over-year limitation in the statutes that applies generally
Hmm,
to
okay.
cash funds.
Yes.
So I don't know if we're dealing with both or one of those or not. It just
That might be a question for Kirsten. Kirsten?
Kirsten?
Kirsten. But yes, there is typically a 16%. So whatever your needs are for the year, you're only allowed to carry over 16% at the end of the year of that amount. But I don't know that that applies to this or not, because it's an enterprise. It may not apply to this, but that would be a good question for her.
And she's not here. I think she was here. Maybe she wasn't.
I haven't
I
seen
don't
her.
remember seeing her.
And Daryl, do you know, just out of curiosity, not that we would work backwards from this, but like for every penny we would put in a surcharge, approximately given the access lines, how much revenue that would be?
Each penny raises about $800,000 per year.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm sorry, did someone say we're at $100 million over 5 years? Is that correct?
Our
Okay.
limitation.
Right.
That's what all enterprises are limited to. And when
For sure.
when we were developing the statute, we assumed that this enterprise would probably never get close to that, at least not in the first 5 years.
Right. Well, I think it's kind of obvious the first year is going to be a little tricky, a little bit of a, I don't want to say guessing game, but kind of.
Well, so I think it probably behooves us to start small.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Let's see what I would love to do if we can find an example. Let's find something where we can, kind of whether it's GIS or it's funding for the resource center with the expressed intent that the resource center start doing what it used to do around, traveling to and outreaching to various PSAPs around the state, making sure folks are like taking the information to them as opposed to relying on them to come get it. But then also create a grant opportunity so that we can, for lack of a better term, practice putting some, guardrails in place and some expectations and various things, and then we can kind of just get a feel for what that looks like, what our selection criteria would be, and all of that, but on a small scale.
And I see Kirsten has joined us. Kirsten, if I can put you on the spot and raise a question for you.
Sure.
So we have in the statute, in the act, there's the 5-year, $100 million limitation. Is there a year-over-year carryover limitation? So as we put together our budget, as we put together our projects, from one year to the next, what is that carryover, or is there a carryover limitation, recommendation? What does that look like?
That is a good question. I apologize for joining late. We got our wires crossed today. I was actually in another board meeting. I will look into this question and get back to you as soon as I can.
Thank you.
And Kristen, just a little additional information on that. I was telling them that there is generally a limit of 16% on cash funds from year to year, 16% carryover. But I have no idea if that applies to enterprise cash funds or not.
Okay, thank you.
That'd be really good to know. If that 16% applies to the department or also to enterprises. I could just envision scenarios where we might even unexpectedly end up not spending funds in a particular year, but plan to the following year.
And yeah, and sometimes there's exemptions, and sometimes if we are restricted and we run into that problem, you can go back to the legislature, I think, and ask for something temporary, but that's off of long ago memory.
Well, even long term, I mean,
Yeah.
things have changed, and I think our odds of Colorado getting, or the country getting, NG 911 grant funding from the federal government are pretty slim for a while to come. But that day may come again, and if this board decides that we want to start accruing funds to be able to provide matching for everyone in the state of Colorado, that means we're going to be carrying over a significant amount of funding ready in case of matching.
A couple people have outs today, so I want to make sure we're getting through the all great discussion. I appreciate it. Any concerns or any additional comments or thoughts from our last meeting talking about community group outreach, solicitation for ideas, costs, thoughts around these topics and kind of project headings?
I think if we can kind of provide some structure, then we can bring this up in the next statewide 911 task force meeting. Basically saying, hey, we'd love some suggestions in these buckets. I would definitely love to do that at the next task force meeting.
Matt?
I have a question about enterprises and the department. Is it common for enterprises to, say, even contract with the department or other? So for example, OIT GIS, if we wanted a GIS project manager, right? If OIT GIS were willing, could we provide funding to OIT GIS to take care of that for us, or would we need to hire an outside third party? Or any other program, right? I mean, effectively, what we're talking about in this aspect is, an advocate, whether it's for public education or a GIS project. It could be project by project based, or dedicated staff to help with the day-to-day running of all of these things.
Or so I think we come back then to the question that came up earlier is, are we going to be kind of an oversight and entity, or are we going to own it in kind of in the same fashion that the resource center does, right? The resource center has the director position that anytime they take on a project, that person kind of owns that project. So are we replicating what the resource center already has in that case? Could the resource center become, as an existing nonprofit, could the resource center kind of become that management, for lack of a better, just partner that we can turn to when we need it?
A de facto executive director / management of projects that the enterprise funds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the rest of the time we're just doling out funds. Go ahead, Lynn. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of examples, and honestly, I don't remember our status, but when we had and it still exists, but the Colorado broadband board,
Mm,
we did pay for resources out of another department, and it was Endora. They hired a project manager specifically for that purpose and the grant management and the funds, and they were in that other department, paid for by the fees that paid for Colorado broadband grants. So I think there are examples of doing that.
No, I guess it would probably fall back onto what does the MOU look like with Dora? What is the process with the state if they're willing to take it on? Kirsten or Daryl, any additional comments toward that?
I don't see any necessary obstacle, and Kirsten, you can correct me if you see any obstacles, but wouldn't see any necessary obstacles between preventing the enterprise from providing funding to a state agency to do work, so long as it's work that the state agency is already authorized to do and maybe just needs additional funding for a specific purpose. As far as the idea of providing funding to the resource center to do things, I think that could potentially greatly reduce the amount of administrative overhead that this enterprise board is responsible for. So for instance, if you were to provide funding to the resource center that the resource center then had to provide in grants to the local agencies, that would eliminate your necessity of having 57 different grant agreements with all of the different 911 authorities in the state. As far as GIS goes, if you wanted to provide funding to OIT for a GIS project, that's something that the resource center is doing right now for the one-time GIS project. But we could reach out to OIT and see what they would need in place, possibly just an MOU between the enterprise and OIT to pay for that ongoing maintenance of the GIS data set, as an example.
I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
I will just say, switching hats to my resource center treasurer hat, that sounds like a lot of work, but it also sounds like a great solution.
Thank you.
Yeah, something that the chair of the resource center board might be thinking about too.
Well, I mean, particularly, I was thinking about like if handing over any sort of decision making authority to the resource center were a part of this, then I don't see an option other than resigning as a member of that board. So, which would be fine, right? They definitely don't want to be moving things in that direction and then pulling the strings over there. So that would be
Perception. Yes.
yes, 100%.
However, fair and honest in doing things with integrity. Perception is part of the equation.
That's exactly right. The other thought that I had is if we contract with OIT, because part of the argument for creating the enterprise and part of the argument against creating the enterprise was this perception of the state taking over management of 911 and this loss of home rule and everything else. If we contract a core ongoing element of maintaining 911 in the state of Colorado with the state, are we inadvertently moving the needle in that direction? That would be something else that we'd want to consider.
Again, perception, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily thinking in terms of long-term ongoing. I was thinking of helping those local 911 authorities that are responsible for having data provided, GIS data provided, get it created and get started with their own way of doing things. I wasn't necessarily envisioning carrying the financial bucket for that forever. But in the alternative, it is entirely possible that it need not be OIT GIS, right? They're already helping today. They're already happy to help. They get the mission. But it could potentially be just again, in partnership with the resource center and a strong executive director helping over there, helping carry that even for the GIS. It would certainly be simpler in terms of just having one primary outside partnership.
Okay.
You know, and to the extent it got funded, that may persuade them. You know, if it was funded at a central location, at least for those pieces initially, I would think that would be important for a number of them.
Well, thank you all. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. We have lost Amy. I do want to bring up for legislative matters. Daryl, are you aware of any changes to the Long Bill amendment that you mentioned?
No, I'm not. Last I heard, the JBC acting as the, I'm trying to remember the word now. It's not interim committee, it's the conference committee. The JBC acting as the conference committee was going to remove that amendment, but I was not able to listen into all of the JBC hearings, and I have not seen any change yet on the legislature's website. So that was my last understanding, is that amendment to take $400,000 from a fund that doesn't have any money in it yet was going to be removed. But I don't know if that got done.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the heads up on that, and anything that you and the DORA Legislative Committee can do to keep us up to date on such matters. Any other comments or concerns, questions about legislative matters from the board? Seeing none, any additional board comments? Anything for the good of the order before we excuse for this day's meeting? All right, then. Our next scheduled meeting is April 30th at 3 p.m. And if there is nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will move to, Matt beat me to it. I'll second.
Matt and Andrew. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Right.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you all very much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.